very much, Mr. Chairman. I think I'll save 5 seconds if I don't go to the lectern there. Well, much has been said about the overview of the regional architecture in the Asia-Pacific. But I think what comes out of the earlier presentations is that there is ASEAN centrality, that the processes are ASEAN-led and ASEAN-driven. Now, perhaps I should skip all that which I have prepared. I will go to the current challenges, which also have been mentioned by others. The rise of China, the rise of India, US pivoting in the Pacific and Asia-Pacific region, and so on. Now, in my view, the regional architecture is certainly facing increasing pressure, and there are enormous challenges that we face. So it perhaps requires some urgent rethinking of some of the assumptions associated with the various components and the elements in the architecture. Now, of course, it may be argued that change is required in the manner of doing things among the regional stakeholders. Some people may think that ASEAN centrality is not necessary anymore, and even not material as it has appeared to be. Now, we see increasing tensions between the imperatives of economic cooperation among states and emerging power balance in the region. There are obviously heightened security concerns. The renewed political and diplomatic standoffs among the neighbors in Northeast Asia, between the Koreans and the Chinese, the Japanese and the Chinese, the Koreans and the Japanese, and so on, are certainly things that cause concern to us. Military competition, territorial disputes, these are all issues that have been mentioned earlier. But I would like also to focus on the internal political, economic, and social challenges that are occurring in countries in the region. And I don't mean simply protests against governments and so on and so forth. This would also include democratic and social changes within these countries. And this has given rise to heightened national consciousness, patriotic fervor, and this could have a major influence on the policies of states towards others, as well as impact their approach towards dealing with regional issues. Now, in spite of all these changes, I still feel that, one, the existing regional architecture remains viable. Two, the various processes that are in place serve well to complement one another, and they provide guarantees for peace and stability and economic development and cooperation in the region. Three, there are obvious duplications and overlaps, and these need to be streamlined. But the system has worked relatively well and has provided both normative and practical value for states in the region. Four, there is no necessity to replace them with new creations, such as an overarching region-wide structure that seeks to bring together all states under one single entity. Five, perhaps what is required is the strengthening of the mechanisms and institutions, the streamlining of the processes, creative innovation perhaps, and also proper and effective management of those processes to strengthen the linkages and improve coordination among the various processes to cope with new and emerging challenges. What I mean here is linkages and coordination, say, between EAS, ARF, ADM, M+, and so on and so forth. Now, I wish to look into the role of ASEAN, because the title of this session itself is the role of ASEAN in India. Now, ASEAN obviously has a major role to play in ensuring the continued existence of a regional architecture equipped to meet expectations as well as to cater for the interests of all concerned. Now, as I've said earlier, it has been mentioned several times during this dialogue so far: ASEAN centrality, ASEAN-led mechanisms and processes, ASEAN-driven. Now, I think what ASEAN needs to focus on is, one, maintenance of unity and cohesion among ASEAN member states in addressing issues and meeting challenges. The chairman has said that unity and it doesn't mean that individual members cannot advance their own interests or its own interests. However, one has to see it this way. ASEAN has derived its strength and standing mainly from the perception within and outside ASEAN that the members are generally united and committed to maintaining cohesion among themselves. But we know that there have been strains and stresses in this unity and cohesion. There have been recent events. We know about what transpired in Phnom Penh, for example. Now, unity can guarantee respect from others, which could translate into peace, stability, and development for the member states. This unity, of course, can result in severe consequences for the future well-being of the ASEAN community. And I'm sure the ASEAN member states are very well aware of this. Secondly, ASEAN should focus on the implementation of the ASEAN community blueprints in a robust manner. ASEAN member states should be ready to implement the programs set out in the blueprints, but they must be willing and able to commit adequate human and financial resources for these purposes. Number three, I believe there needs to be a serious review of the ASEAN Charter. Now, the Charter itself provides for a review after 5 years of its adoption, and Myanmar has pledged to begin this process under its current chairmanship. This is not going to be an easy undertaking, because we know that the drafting of the Charter itself went through a very difficult and contentious process. And therefore, such a review could be equally difficult and contentious. But as ASEAN prepares to usher in the ASEAN community, ASEAN prepares itself for the post-2015 era, a review of the Charter perhaps could be seriously considered, leading to a possible revision of some of its provisions. But one has to understand that any review of a constitution or a charter is going to literally open the Pandora's box. Next, I believe there needs to be adherence to principles, rules, and norms. A lot of people have been talking about this. As a rules-based organization, ASEAN has to ensure the respect for and adherence to those principles, rules, and norms which ASEAN itself has adopted. And this is important to maintain ASEAN's credibility as a central player in the regional architecture. And ASEAN's partners must also be prepared to reciprocate in this venture. The next point, I believe, is to focus on strengthening of ASEAN organs, structures, and institutions. Now, to meet the present and future challenges, especially 2015 and beyond, ASEAN must seriously consider strengthening the various organs and institutions, particularly the ASEAN Secretariat. The roles of the Secretariats and the ASEAN Secretary General are provided in the Charter, but perhaps both need to be given appropriate powers and resources to effectively carry out their mandate, especially in the post-2015 ASEAN community era. And to me, what is crucial here is the question of increasing the budget for the Secretariat must be given utmost priority. The next point I believe the ASEAN should focus on is the preservation and enhancement of ASEAN centrality. Everybody recognizes this. All the dialogue partners, all participants in the ARF, all participants, the 27 participants in the ARF, the 18 participants in the EAS recognize this. But I believe ASEAN has to ensure the continued relevance and acceptance of ASEAN centrality. ASEAN has to ensure that this is something that it feels it has a divine right to claim to. You know, it has to be earned. And therefore, ASEAN must be able to demonstrate that it is capable of playing its role in the driver's seat. Now, the problem with being in the driver's seat is you can remain the proud owner and driver of a limousine where your guests enjoy riding, in which your guests enjoy riding, or you could be the driver of an early model taxi that needs a lot of fixings, and you are the driver who is told where to go and what to do. And worse still, if your passengers decide to get off at some point in time before you reach your destination. So I think ASEAN needs to consider this very, very seriously. The next point is that there need to be concerted and sustained efforts to close the development gap and increase connectivity. A lot of it has been discussed here so far in this forum, and I don't think I need to elaborate on that. Now, I wish to go into the role of others, including India, in looking at this, at how to manage this regional architecture. I don't propose to go into specifics as such, but I think that in the years ahead it is crucial, especially following the entry of ASEAN into the era of the ASEAN community after 2015, for the ASEAN partners to continue to nurture their relations and cooperation with ASEAN and to work together to maintain a peaceful and stable environment in the Asia Pacific. And I think the commitment from India is pretty obvious here with the vision statement, as well as what the Minister had said to us this morning. Now, with ASEAN centrality in the evolution of the regional architecture having been accepted by all, therefore all states should encourage ASEAN to continue to play its role. There shouldn't be any efforts or any views that say that ASEAN centrality is irrelevant, it needs to be replaced by other initiatives and so on. Now, what is important, to me, while it is important for ASEAN to maintain its unity and cohesion, others must be able to respect and encourage ASEAN to remain united and cohesive, so that the whole region can move in a climate of peace and stability. Any conscious effort to undermine ASEAN unity, I believe, would have strong consequences not only for ASEAN's future but also for the region as a whole. Now, the next point would be continued support by the strategic and dialogue partners for ASEAN's visions, plans, and action programs. And this is crucial. ASEAN obviously would require massive investments and infusion of capital if one talks about whether narrowing the development gap, whether it is about connectivity, or whether it's about building the regional economy and the markets and so on. Now, obviously, India and China can play a major role in this because of the geographical proximity to the ASEAN region. And I believe the next point would be that it is important for the partners to continue to support the efforts to strengthen the ASEAN institutions by providing not only diplomatic support but also meaningful advice and resources. Now, we understand that there have been various funds created to assist ASEAN, and these are aimed at promoting cooperation between various dialogue partners or strategic partners with ASEAN. And these have been very useful, very helpful for ASEAN, but there could also be some creative means of making additional resources available to ASEAN, especially for the ASEAN institutions. And I believe the high-level panel that's been established by ASEAN will be looking into this. Now, as a conclusion, Mr. Chairman, what can ASEAN and partners do together? I believe that ASEAN and its partners must continue to evaluate the efficiency and the effectiveness of the present frameworks, structures, and mechanisms to ensure that they are able to cope with the emerging challenges. There's of course room for improvement, and efforts should not be spared to do so without necessarily compromising ASEAN centrality. There is merit in studying or reviewing some of these processes with a view to improving their roles and functions. Now, for example, the EAS would reach its 10th year by 2015. Now, it may be worth for the leaders, for example, to agree to perhaps a review of the list of priority areas so as to be able to meet new challenges. Now, last point, Mr. Chairman, in maintaining regional architecture that promotes peace and stability, I believe it is important for all stakeholders to respect the principles and norms that govern state behavior and interstate relations. And this has been said by others earlier. I don't need to elaborate on that. And I believe that ASEAN, together with the partners, must work to ensure respect for those principles. Thank you.